This trooper will drop his British leg pack loaded with demolition supplies just before he lands. At dusk, Pathfinder teams board the ships that will show the way into enemy territory. 925 troop-laden aircraft will home tonight on navigation aids set up by these Pathfinders. This is 1 minute out of 1 hour in one day in the world's history that has rarely been equaled. These are the first ships to take off in the airborne invasion of Fortress Europe. First Pathfinder ship is airborne at 21:54. As the Pathfinders head for the coast of France, other C-47s move into position for their takeoff at the head of the runway. "30 minutes after the Pathfinders take off, the first serials of C-47s follow on the invasion path. Coastal defenses are softened up for the beach landing. Daybreak. The naval bombardment continues. Went in ahead of the troops to blast enemy coastal installations. Priority number 1, air supremacy, had been obtained a long time before D-Day. The 8th and 9th Air Forces had accomplished that. Standing offshore, the invasion craft wait as Allied planes blast the coast. Allied surface ships come in. Go on to the next phase, the bombing and crippling of roads, bridges, waterways, railheads, the isolation of a battlefield. And the battlefield is isolated. No German reserves come through to the coast in any strength. The beachhead holds and grows as the Air Force piles up a record number of sorties. Fighters blast every target that moves on enemy ground. Any target of opportunity is legitimate prey. Record sorties are flown by the fighters on D-Day. Back in England, the next glider serials are being marshaled for the takeoff. The C-47s are doing double duty. Back from the paratroop drops, they're ready to take off with gliders. Dual tow had been practiced in the States, but it was not used in this operation due to the extra time necessary for air assembly and to the additional marshalling space which it would require on the airdromes. Hard-pressed paratroopers who went into action in darkness earlier today are depending on reinforcements and heavier equipment, which will be delivered by these glider serials. 3 groups of fighter cover are in takeoff position at airdromes to the south. The coordinated British effort was made simultaneously by the British 6th Airborne Division, transported by RAF 38 Group on objectives around Caen. Particularly interesting was the delivery of 8.5-ton tanks of a Recce regiment in 30 huge Hamilcar gliders. 29 of the 30 tanks were in action within 10 minutes after they were landed. U-turn is made at the command assembly point. Air superiority makes possible this daylight operation. ACAC ended a mission for this friendly airplane. As these gliders and their tow planes head into France, C-47s, which already have dropped their gliders, pass on their way back to England. Two-way traffic, and it's congested. These are areas flooded by the Germans. Parachutes and gliders from the previous serials. Gliders cut loose from their tow planes. We have fighter cover all the way to the landing zone. Not even a lone German fighter was able to sneak through. One of the gliders makes a landing in the flooded area. Here are the staked fields intelligence warned us about. The traps consisted of poles 12 to 15 feet long. One of the tow planes crashed and burned, but actually the C-47 suffered few losses. Some of the glider landings were rugged, and so were some of the paratroop landings. There were plenty of dummy German guns around. But just as many of the real thing. The men who landed here won't forget this meadow. Resupply ships took off simultaneously with the last glider serial from 5 airfields which were designated as takeoff fields for resupply by air. All resupply was directed by the Allied Expeditionary Air Force Headquarters through an agency called KTOR, Combined Air Transport Operations Room. Packing, delivery, loading, and lashing of all supplies for aerial delivery was the job of the Service Command. Requests for air resupply were approved by the Army Group or Air Force in the field. Supplies are dropped. Meanwhile, the airborne infantry had fanned out and taken initial objectives, most of them after hard fighting and heavy losses. Now they're moving through the key town of Saint-Mère-Église. On the beach, landing strip number 1 is built immediately. Balloon barrage to protect the field from enemy strafers. D+4. On the still incompleted strip troop carrier begins evacuation of the wounded to airdromes convenient to base hospitals in England. These wounded were the first to land and the first to fight on D-Day. Blood plasma is supplied before the ships take off. Within 2 hours, these men will be under expert care far from the front. By now, Saint-Mariglis is well to the rear. On the edge of town, another landing strip is hacked out. Even before the landing mats are laid, a resupply glider comes in with more equipment. The weather turned bad, and it was impossible to move supplies across the beaches. But the army which had landed had to be supplied. Back in England, troop carrier is assigned the job of getting it to them. Nurses and medical supplies make the trip along with shells for Allied guns. Materiel brought in those first days by troop carrier made the difference between a continued assault to Carentan utilizing the elements of surprise and enemy disorganization, or a stalled offensive, helplessly waiting for supplies bogged down by weather. The landing strip at Saint-Mary-Glisse handled the traffic for resupply. Jeeps and trucks are lined up at the field, waiting to rush the supplies to the front. As soon as the ammunition is unloaded, the wounded will be brought aboard. Gliders used on the first day's operation and those used in resupply are towed back to England. Inaccessible spots, tow planes use an aerial pickup to get the gliders back home. Others, not flyable, will be disassembled and hauled back by boat. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were in action 33 and 24 days, respectively. The 82nd, having captured Saint-Mary-Glisse and secured the bridgehead across the Mer de Ray River, destroyed other river crossings, protected the flank of the 7th Army Corps, and drove west to the Douve River. The 101st seized the areas assigned it, destroyed bridges, and drove on to Carentan to establish a defense area there. Troop carrier, the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division sent this commendation.
Under most difficult conditions, including landing under fire in enemy-occupied terrain, glider pilots did a splendid job. On the ground, they rendered most willing and effective service, providing local protection for the division command post during the most critical period when the division was under heavy attack from three sides. Please express to all elements of your command who brought the division in by glider or parachute, or who performed resupply missions for us, our admiration for their coolness under fire, their determination to overcome all obstacles, and for their magnificent spirit of cooperation.
This is part of the price paid for 6 and 7, June 1944. $1,662 troop carrier airplanes were dispatched in the first 24 hours of the assault. 43 were lost and 311 damaged by small arms fire. A lot happened here that cameras could never get. But a corporal with the Pathfinders remembers.
We were covering the landing of the first bunch of gliders. We were pinned down by German fire across the field. As the men came running out, they stepped right into it and started to drop all around us. A German cannon blew one glider right apart.
a veteran glider pilot.
A night glider operation means more landing casualties and extreme difficulty in unloading. It is certainly not desirable if a dawn or dusk landing is at all practicable.
A power pilot.
I flew in a parachute serial the first night and the navigation aids really worked, but I couldn't see the light T, which was supposed to be on my drop zone. BUPS was used very little because Rebecca and G worked so well. 717 was used to check landfall and general position, but that's about all.
A War Department observer who entered combat with one of the airborne divisions.
Troops were dropped generally in the vicinity of the DZs, but were badly scattered. It appears that prearranged supply systems are not flexible enough for airborne combat. Supplies should be dropped as called for by local commanders rather than dropped in mass. Large-scale parachute resupply drops are wasteful and should be restricted to emergencies. More attention should be paid to switching over to ground supply as soon as possible.
A troop carrier liaison officer.
Our Pathfinder teams, in 2 cases I know of, suffered heavy casualties. Eureka was installed in every case, at times with the Pathfinders flat on their stomachs, pinned down by enemy crossfire. The light Ts, which we expected so much help from, were only 10% operational due to enemy fire. 50% of the resupply drop landed in enemy hands. Communications didn't exist to advise later serials of changes in the enemy situation. Troop carrier operations and communications personnel should move with the first parachute or glider units. 89% of the horses and 50% of the wackos crashed in landing, but 75% of personnel and equipment were ready for combat.
Back from Normandy, these men would have faced further tests. How much they had learned will be history. History made by an airborne army.